Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. A very warm good evening to everyone. I hope all of you are doing good. I'm glad to see all of you join in right here on time at 5 p.m. As we announced yesterday, for just 2 days, that is today and tomorrow, this Hindu Newspaper Analysis session will be at 5 p.m. and then day after tomorrow, we'll go back to our original timings of 10 a.m. I welcome you all to today's session where we will be discussing the most important news stories in the Hindu newspaper of today, both from the mains and from the prelims examination point of view. I hope that you have now made it a habit that every day after the session ends, you go to a Telegram channel and attend the quiz as well based on these articles. Let's see what are the important articles that we have here for you today for today's discussion. These are the set of articles that we will be discussing. From the editorial section, we will be discussing about adultery as a concept. What is it that the Supreme Court has said about that, and what is it that the government is demanding about adultery, mainly with respect to the armed forces. Then the rural-urban dichotomy. It is an article about the differences between rural and urban India, the cost of development in the rural areas, etc. Then the concept of ESG, a very interesting and important concept. ESG, that is environmental social governance. In simple terms, the businesses do not only have to run after profit, they also have to make sure that in their business activities, environment, society and governance are also taken care of. Then we will be discussing about same-sex marriage, which has been opposed in the Supreme Court by the Union government. These are the 4 articles that we will be going into in detail from the mains point of view, and then we will be going ahead with some prelims specific articles, factual data. We will be studying about Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. Is it true that we have achieved 100% open defecation free status or not? Then we will be discussing about Rajasthan government's new bill called the Right to Health. The bill has not been passed, but there's a lot of debate about the bill. Then a new kind of a microscope being developed called glowscope. What exactly is that? Then Maharashtra is now launching their old scheme once again called Jalyukt Shivar project. We'll be discussing that. And in the end, the last news to be discussed today will be about the government's plan to make the buildings net zero waste. So in short, a lot of important news stories to be discussed from prelims and mains, both points of view. Let's begin without any further delay with the very first article from the editorial page of the Hindu newspaper today. The first article is about the concept of adultery as a misconduct. Now let's try and understand what is adultery and what is the article all about. In simple terms, adultery means, let's assume that you are a married person. You have a husband or a wife. Outside your marriage, if you establish physical contact with someone else, if there are your physical relations that you have with someone else outside your marriage, if you have an affair, in simple terms, that is what you mean by adultery. So any married male or female who establishes another relationship outside marriage, that will be considered as adultery. Now earlier, adultery was actually a criminal offense, meaning that under the IPC, if you engage in adultery, meaning that if outside your marriage you establish some other relationship, then you were liable to be punished. However, the Supreme Court in 2018 said that no, this will not happen. In 2018, the Supreme Court, in a very important case called the Joseph Shine case, the Supreme Court said that adultery cannot be considered as a criminal offense under the law. Section 497 that talks about adultery is unconstitutional. In simple terms, the Supreme Court said if someone establishes another relationship outside their marriage, the person will not be punished under law. Whatever happens in the marriage, if they get a divorce or whatever, that is a personal matter. But as per the law, you will not be sent to jail just because you conducted adultery. Please do remember, that is what the Supreme Court said in 2018. That adultery will not be a criminal offense. Now, after this judgment came in, the government of India again went to the Supreme Court. The government said that okay, adultery is not a criminal offense, we accept that. However, if people of the armed forces, if the personnel of the armed forces, let's say someone working in the army, someone working in the military, someone working in Navy, Air Force, or even in the police, if any of those people engage in adultery, then the government still wants to punish them under the law. The government said that if someone is working in the armed forces, then they should still be punished for adultery under the Army Act, Air Force Act, and the Navy Act. They asked this permission from the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said, okay, you can do that. Let me quickly repeat what we just discussed. In 2018, the Supreme Court said adultery will not be considered as a criminal offense. You can deal with it personally in between your marriage. What happens doesn't relate to us. We will not punish the person. Then the government asked, however, if someone conducts adultery and that person is working in the armed forces, they should still be punished under the Act of Army, Navy, or Air Force. Supreme Court said, okay, if someone is working in the armed forces and they indulge in adultery, then you can still punish them. Now, this is where the question starts. The government said we should be allowed to punish armed forces personnel if they engage in adultery because of Article 33 of the Indian Constitution. Now, I hope all of you know Article 33 of the Indian Constitution. It is in Part 3 of the Constitution. This is one of the exceptions to fundamental rights. Article 33 says that the Parliament of India has the power to take away certain fundamental rights from the personnel of the armed forces. So, the fundamental rights that you have, that I have, that other citizens of India have, armed forces do not have the same fundamental right. Some of them may be taken away. I'll give you a simple example. You, me, we have the right to freedom of speech and expression. People working in the armed forces do not have that same right. So we can get our views published in the newspapers, we can write articles in the media, etc. But there are a lot of limitations on the people working in the armed forces. They cannot have this freedom of expression. So government said Article 33 allows us to put certain restrictions on the armed forces personnel, and that is why even for adultery, they should be facing disciplinary action. Why? The government's argument was that if someone is working in the armed forces, they must exhibit exemplary behavior. Also, there should not be any distraction in their duty. As per the government, if someone working in the armed forces indulges in adultery, that may distract the person from their duty, and that is why the government of India wants them to be still punished under the law. Interestingly, there have been different judgments given on this. Rajasthan High Court, for example, said something else. In 2019, Rajasthan High Court said that no, this is not correct. Whatever a person does in his or her personal life is a different matter altogether. Even if a person is working for the government and that person indulges in an extramarital affair, that person engages in adultery, even then the government should not have the power to punish them. That is what the Rajasthan High Court had said. Rajasthan High Court said that the service conduct rules should not apply here. The author also seems to have the same point of view. Now it is interesting to see who is the author first. As I tell you every single time, whenever you read an article, first read who is the author. If you look at this, author is actually a former DGP of Chhattisgarh. So a former very senior IPS officer. He is the one who has written this article. So he also takes the side of people working in the services. He also says that this is wrong. The government should not treat people working for the armed forces differently as compared to others. He says that yes, there is Article 33 under which the parliament can restrict certain fundamental rights of the people of the armed forces. That is correct. But Article 33 should be utilized only and only if to ensure that people discharge their duties properly and they discharge their duties with proper discipline. Again, as per the author, there should be a difference between private life and professional life. Whatever the person is doing in his or her private life, doesn't matter whatever is the profession of the person, that should not impact the employer's decision. The employer, the government should not be right to punish the person. This is his or her personal matter. Just because they are working in the armed forces doesn't mean that they should have different rules for them. That is the author's point of view. Now, if you look here, Article 33 of the Indian Constitution, which is in Part 3, it talks about the Parliament's power to restrict certain fundamental rights from the members of the armed forces, paramilitary forces, police forces, intelligence agencies as well. The interesting part is this Article 33 has certain other conditions that you must remember. For example, when you say members of the armed forces, this also includes those who are not in the field of fighting. For example, those who are working as carpenters in the armed forces. There are many carpenters to take care of all the furniture that the armed forces own. There are many mechanics, cooks, barbers, tailors, etc. Even for them, Article 33 gives a power to Parliament to restrict some of their fundamental rights. Not just this, Article 33 only allows the Parliament to have this power to take away or restrict certain fundamental rights from the members of the armed forces and not the state legislatures. Only the Parliament can do that and the state legislatures cannot. This is the debate around this article, professional versus personal. Does the government have extra power over people working in the armed forces? Just because they are in the armed forces, does it mean the government has the power to punish them for adultery for which others cannot be punished? Before we go on to the second article, let me quickly take up a few questions that you have asked in the chat. Shadab has a question. What is the logic behind decriminalizing adultery? Is it not a type of treachery or betrayal of the life partner, especially to women? Women can be more vulnerable if their husbands did adultery. I understand your issue. See, you have to understand there is something which is morally wrong, which is a separate thing altogether. But for everything that is morally incorrect, you cannot make it a criminal offense. When you make something a criminal offense, that gives a lot of power to the law enforcement. That also gives a lot of power to people who want to misuse the law. There cannot be a progressive country that interferes in each and every personal matter. This doesn't mean to say that the Supreme Court is advocating that adultery is good, extramarital affairs is good. They are not saying that. What they are arguing is that it should not be termed as a crime. You can deal with it on a personal basis. That is what they are saying. Priya is saying what kind of questions can be framed in the mains from this topic. So you can have question about Article 33. You can also have question in ethics from this topic. For example, about how fair is it that the armed forces personnel are treated separately as compared to the others. You can also have question about adultery as a concept. All these can be asked. Okay. Then I have a question from Aditya. Is it fair to extend Article 33 to non-combative forces, members of the armed forces? I think it is correct because see, even the non-combative people in the armed forces who are living with the armed forces, who are working with the armed forces, they also have a lot of information that common people would not have. So let's say there's a barber or a tailor who works with the military or a doctor who works in the military. They spend their entire time with the military, so they know a lot of information about military that you and me would not know, that may be dangerous. So to control their conduct, I do believe that the Parliament should have this right. Okay, perfect. Let's move on then to the second article for the day. The second article for the day is titled Reimagining the Urban-Rural Dichotomy. Now, a lot of times, you have some articles in the Hindu newspaper that have a lot of complex words used time and time again. This is one of those articles. If you read the first two paragraphs of this article in the Hindu newspaper, you might not even be able to understand what is it that the author is trying to say here. These are some of those kind of articles which make it very complex for the reader to even understand what is their point of view. So let me try and simplify this in as layman language as possible. In simple terms, what is happening here is the author is saying that urban and rural areas in India are very, very different. Now, if a person lives in an urban area as compared to a person lives in rural areas, their lives are very different. The opportunities that they get are very different. Let's take a very simple example. you are able to watch me or you are able to watch any of the classes that you have online because you are lucky enough that you have good broadband connectivity wherever you are. Wherever you are. Now let's imagine there is an IAS aspirant who is preparing just as you are preparing, but the person is living in that area, in that rural area maybe, where the person does not have that much internet connectivity, or the person does not have electricity, a person does not have those facilities. Then there is no equality between you two. The only difference between you and the other person is that he or she is living in an area where the government infrastructure has not reached, while in urban areas it has. So in simple terms, there is a big difference in opportunities that people get just because they are living either in a rural area or in an urban area. As per the author, this difference should go away. And it has been happening over years. For example, a lot of villages are now being converted into rural areas. We have a lot of opportunities in the rural areas now also building up gradually. But even today, there is a big difference between development of urban and rural areas. If you live in a rural area, or if someone in your family lives in a rural area, you would be very well aware that if you live in a rural area, God forbid if you fall ill, there is a good chance that you might not get to see a doctor very near to your house. Even if you do have a doctor, maybe the doctor may not be qualified. If the doctor tells you to conduct or to have, let's say, 5 blood tests or go and have an X-ray or MRI, then you again will have a very tough time in finding out a diagnostic lab, where to go, where not to go. These are things in cities which we take for granted. In urban areas, we take it for granted that yes, you just have to spend the money, you will be able to get your blood test, the person will come to your home, take blood sample, no issues with that. These are things that in urban areas we take it for granted, but in rural areas that is not the case. This difference between urban and rural has to be removed if the country has to progress. The author here says that one example of a state that has been able to remove that difference gradually is Kerala. He says that in Kerala, if you see, the difference between urban and rural areas is decreasing. The government policies are now being seen to be as effective in rural areas as they are in urban areas as well. There are other examples also that he gives, but he says that in Kerala, you can see the most impressive example of linking of urban and rural areas, and this is something that the other states can also learn from. Now, this barrier between the two, and I gave you multiple examples. The most basic facilities, having reliable electricity, having clean drinking water, having broadband connection, having good hospital facilities. These are the most basic facilities that we expect to be or to live a prosperous life. Even these basic necessities are sometimes absent in the rural areas. There is not much connectivity, communication systems are not good enough, and that is why, since 2/3 of our population still lives in the rural areas, our development speed is still very low. That is because the government schemes, the government models are not as effective when they are implemented in the rural areas. People still lack access to water, food, fuel, etc. This is something that we must address. The difference between rural and the urban areas has to come down. Now, this has happened sometimes in the past. I'll give you some examples. If you look at, let's say, 20 years back, let's assume that this was Delhi, and there were some villages in the vicinity of Delhi 20 years back. Now what has happened is that the size has grown. Now this has become Delhi. All these villages now have high-rise buildings. You have a lot of development in these areas. So urbanization has happened. In Chennai also, for example, you see a lot of villages that used to be outside the urban areas, all of them have now been included in the urban areas. So yes, there is some progress on that front. However, there are also some problems that we have. I'll give you an example. When you say that you are urbanizing the rural areas as well, when you say that yes, we are bringing development to rural areas, we are setting up more factories, setting up more industry in the rural areas, then that also means that you are cutting down the forest. That also means that you are harming the environment. So there has to be a balance between the two. the rural and urban dichotomy. The word dichotomy basically means confusion. Dichotomy means when you want to do one thing, the second thing will not happen. If you want to do the second thing, then the first thing will not happen. So basically, rural urban dichotomy is number one. You want development in rural areas. However, that comes at a cost of environment. That harms the environment, that has a negative impact on the ecology of the area, and that is where the dichotomy lies. How to balance out the two, how to make sure that the two things are working hand in hand, that is a challenge that the government has to face. Now, there are a few examples which have been given by experts. What is it that the government must do to bring more development in the rural areas on a sustainable model? Let me give you some examples. Number one, empowering self-help groups. You might have heard about self-help groups, I'm sure. Self-help groups mainly are groups mainly formed by women, although they can be formed by men as well, that come together to start a small business by having equal shareholding. Self-help groups, for example, will come together and have a small business like, let's say, making of pickles, papad, candles, paper bags, etc., so that they can sell in the market. In rural areas, essentially, those kind of businesses will be ideal that do not require a lot of infrastructure to be built. If the government gives a push to these kind of model like the self-help group, where people can have a sustainable living without harming the environment, without cutting down the trees, without focusing a lot on development, that is something that the government can actually implement in the long run. Second suggestion, provide skill sets. India is in a very unique position right now. India is a major exporter of labor around the entire world. India's population is our biggest strength. At a time that most of the developed nations right now do not have a lot of people to work, they are looking towards India to get labor. However, the problem in India is most of the people, even though who are graduate from college, do not have the skills. For example, if any one of you is working, if any one of you is in a job, just try and answer this question in your own mind. In your job, are you doing something that you were taught in college or not? Is there anyone who says that yes, I am doing the same thing that I was taught in college? For most cases, the answer will be no. Meaning that there is a huge difference between what we are taught and what we actually do in our jobs. So there is a difference between the skill sets, and the government has to make sure that the skill sets that are required right now to get good jobs, that is provided. The government of India, for example, in this year's budget, said that they will be focusing on AI labs, they will be focusing on 5G as well, which is a good step ahead. The government can also utilize Manrega in a better manner to have better development in the rural India. Manrega for now has been considered as a scheme that has been giving some money to the people, but in terms of infrastructure that is developed, it is not of very high quality. Most infrastructure developed under Manrega is considered as a pretty low quality infrastructure, which is the government's responsibility to improve. There are some examples of Manrega being used for good infrastructure. Let me share those examples with you. Rajasthan uses Manrega to ensure that water security issues are solved in the villages. Similarly, in Maharashtra, a lot of canal building is being done under Manrega. Bihar also has a Haryali mission underway. They employ the Manrega workers. Telangana, Chhattisgarh, Sikkim, these are just some of the examples of how Manrega can also be used to implement important schemes in the rural areas rather than just randomly giving anything to the person in the name of a job, giving them the minimum wage and letting them go. So Manrega should not be seen as just a scheme to give some money to the people. It should rather be seen as a scheme so that the infrastructure that is being developed is robust and it can last for a longer time duration. Perfect. Let's move on to the third article, but before that, let me quickly take up a few questions. Okay. I have a long question from Shadab. Do you think economy of scale is the most important reason behind less development in rural areas? We always need private investment, and without seeing any big opportunities, private sector will not invest. It's a vicious circle basically. Private sector will go where the profits are. Profits will come where the private sector goes. The problem is, usually in new areas, whenever you want to see the beginning of any development, it has to be the government's responsibility to give the first push. Only then there will be the private sector that will come in. They will only come in when they have adequate opportunities of development, when they think that they can actually earn enough money. The role of rural development is with both private and the public sector. Private sector has to give investment, but the public sector, that is the government, also has to make sure that the policies are much smoother. Let's say if there is a private company who wants to set up a big manufacturing plant in a rural area, it is the government's responsibility to make the process much easier, to give the permission in a much smoother manner so that they can also get encouraged. So it happens, or it has to be from both the sides. Then I have a question from Aditya, I think. Just a second. Okay, I have a question. Are there any prime examples of affirmative policies in Kerala with respect to rural-urban continuum? Also, how would define rural-urban continuum? So, continuum basically means an area where the two merge. The phrase rural-urban continuum simply means an area which might be considered as a rural area, but the urban area schemes, etc. still apply there. So the development of urban area, when it reaches the rural area, that is an area that you call rural-urban continuum. Now, rather than giving you that example, I'll give you a personal example. So I went to Kerala, I think I've shared this example earlier as well. So I went to Kerala a few months back, and I went to this place called Wayanad. And now in Wayanad, we went to see some waterfall or something. Now, when you go there, when you park your car in the parking area, it was officially a village. The parking area attendant gave us a parking slip. That parking slip said that this parking area belongs to whatever the name of the village was. That village is Gram Panchayat. So basically what Kerala has done is they have empowered their panchayats to collect revenue, which not many states have done in India. Under the constitution, panchayats now have been given a constitutional status, but in rural areas, they don't have a lot of sources of revenue. What Kerala has done is they have empowered their gram panchayats, for example, to collect money in the form of parking, to collect money in other ways. So that again is an example that you actually can see. Again, something that I've shared earlier as well. Okay, I'll take one last question before I go ahead. Without rural areas, our culture will be permanently lost. I don't think without rural areas, culture will be lost. If you live in a city, do you not follow Indian culture? I think that this phrase culture will be lost is a pretty overused phrase. I don't think it really means anything. If you live in an urban area, it doesn't really mean that now you will not follow that culture, you will become something else entirely. It depends on your family values, it depends on how you choose to live life. It doesn't really mean that just because you want to continue your culture. What is your culture? Is your culture, or does your culture say that people in the rural area should continue living in poor conditions? No, that is not what our culture is. At the end of the day, there has to be continuous development of everyone. Doesn't matter where they live. Perfect. Let's move on then. The third important article that we have is on the concept of ESG. What is ESG? Let's try and understand. ESG stands for environmental, social and governance considerations. In simple terms, in the past few years, about a decade or so, there is a new idea that has been developing in the Western world especially. The idea is that in order for a business to be called a successful business, in order for a company to be called a successful company, we should not just look at how much profit they are making. We should not just look at how big their achievements are, what is their rank in the Forbes list. We should rather look at them in terms of what are they doing for the environment, what are they doing for the society, and are they abiding by the governance laws of the country or not. That is, now the definition of success or successful businesses should change. That is an idea that has been propagated in the Western world in the past decade or so. That is why you see many companies now trying to form a positive image in the market that, see, we do so much for the environment, we plant trees, we run plantation drives, we also run an orphanage, we also run an old age home. All these are ideas that the companies propagate under the ESG. That is, that we also are environmentally, socially and governance wise aware. The problem is, in India, we don't really have this concept so far. In India, we have something else called CSR. You might have heard about CSR. CSR stands for Corporate Social Responsibility. We have corporate social responsibility, meaning that in India we have a law under which if there is a company above a certain threshold of profit, and we'll discuss that as well, big companies are mandated. Now, what are those big companies? Number one, if you have 500 crore of net worth, number one. Second condition, if you have a turnover of 1000 crore, or if you have a net profit of 5 crore. If any of these are the conditions that you fulfill, then a company has to mandatorily spend at least 2% of their profit in the last 3 years on an average on CSR activities. Now, what are CSR activities? The government of India releases a list of what will be called a CSR activity. For example, environment, conservation, education, sanitation, health. All these are just examples of CSR. So that is why you will see a lot of big companies, organizations. For example, look at Reliance. So Reliance has a separate organization called Reliance Foundation. Under Reliance Foundation, they spend a lot of money on these activities. With Tata's also, you will see a lot of money being spent. Big companies have to spend at least 2% of their last 3 years average profit. That is CSR. Now, CSR is mandatory. However, CSR is not the same as ESG. ESG is a concept that India still is very new to. CSR is a concept that's an old concept in India. And please understand, when you talk about big companies that make huge profits, for them even 2% is a lot of money. I'll give you an example. ONGC. Just after the class, just try and search the profit that ONGC makes every year. ONGC's profit that they make every year goes above 40,000 crore. This year, in fact, the financial year that will end, this year, it is expected that the ONGC's profit will go even further. So ONGC usually makes huge profits for the government, one of the most profitable government company. Now let's assume that ONGC makes a profit of 40,000 crore. Let's just assume for a moment. For them, even 2% will be 800 crore. That is just one single company I'm talking about. Now talk about Reliance, talk about Tata's, all these companies, when you take 2%, that will be a huge, huge sum that is being spent on a lot of these activities. But this is not ESG. ESG means that you have to be working according to environmental norms. You cannot harm the environment and later on spend money on rebuilding the environment. You have to make sure that there is good diversity in your company, there is social representation, you are abiding by the governance, so on and so forth. For example, UK has a law called UK Modern Slavery Act. What is that law? Under that law, any business in UK which has a sale of over 36 million pounds, those companies will have to prepare a report that talks about what efforts are they taking to reduce human trafficking, to reduce child labor, to reduce any of the other problems in the society. So they mandatorily have to publish a report every year. What are they doing to make society a better place? Something like that does not exist in India. In India, we have the CSR law, that is the corporate social responsibility, but we do not have something like the ESG. There are multiple examples of what ESG can be. E stands for environment, meaning that the company should work towards biodiversity, water efficiency, the company should be energy efficient, the company should ensure that their carbon footprint is reduced, the company should have social responsibility, meaning that it should create a healthy work environment for everyone, the company should ensure that there is diversity in the workplace, the company should be ethical, the company should follow all the laws of the government. In India, we do not have the concept of ESG so far, as I told you, although there are a few initiatives. Like we have the National Green Tribunal, you all would have heard about. The NGT or National Green Tribunal can impose fines on organizations if they are not abiding by the law. Similarly, SEBI, that is the regulator of the stock market, they also recently started an initiative that was called Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. Under this, they asked the top 1,000 listed companies to give a report about how much is their greenhouse gas emission, what are they doing to protect the environment. So India is going in that direction very gradually. We are asking the companies to become more socially, more environmentally responsible, but it is not something that the Indian companies are adapting to very quickly. Now there is one other side of the story. What advantage will the Indian companies have if they abide by ESG regulations? Meaning that if, let's say, I run a big company, I am working under the law, no problem with that. All of a sudden someone comes to me and says, sir, your company is good, making a lot of profit, fine. But sir, you are still not abiding by environmental laws. You are still harming the environment. You still don't have a very good workplace. You should abide by ESG regulations. So I would say, but why would I do that? Why would I spend any extra money? I'm already making profit. I'm abiding by all the laws. Why should I now think that plastic consumption should be low in my company? Why should I take so much headache that no water should be utilized properly in my company? The answer is, when your company in India says that we are now abiding by the ESG regulations, or we are environmentally very friendly, we are socially a great workplace, then it is a higher chance that you might get contracts and tenders from companies in UK, Europe, US, etc. Because in US and in Europe, ESG has become a very big thing. They are looking to partner with those organizations only that follow these norms. So this is where the companies can invest in this kind of a logic, and the companies can expect that they can have better partnership, better projects from US and European companies. So this is where the incentive is. The incentive is not that the government will give them some money. The incentive is that if they claim that we are now ESG friendly, we are environmental friendly, etc., they may expect more partnerships from EU, from US, which want to partner with environmentally friendly countries. That is something that China does not do. With China, you cannot expect these kind of things, but European companies, etc., would want that we partner with other companies that are ESG compliant. There are some examples of what can be ESG. Environmental norms can be reducing air pollution, managing your water better, water conservation, rainwater harvesting, etc. in your building. Social activity example can be abiding by labor practices, creating a healthy work environment. So for example, big companies should have a crèche associated with their workplace. Companies which have a lot of ladies that work there, if the lady has a very small kid, she cannot leave the kid at home. When she brings the kid to work, there should be a place where the kid can stay. So there should be crèche that should be associated with the workplace. And there are many companies that do that to make the workplace much more inviting for the female employees as well. Governance wise, the data should be secure, you should be following the government laws, you should be abiding by the government policy. These are some examples of what ESG reforms are. As I told you just 5 minutes back, SEBI has published or introduced a new kind of regulation called National Guide called Responsible Business Conduct. Under this, SEBI has asked the top 1,000 stock exchange or top 1,000 businesses that are listed in the stock exchange to abide by all these things. The businesses should promote human rights, the businesses should be ethical, transparent, sustainable, etc. These are the 9 pointers that SEBI has also given. These are some of the things that Indian government and Indian organizations, regulators are also doing to give a push towards ESG. Government of India has also taken certain initiatives. For example, Ministry of Corporate Affairs has asked SEBI to introduce these kind of guidelines which they have. We also have concept of green bonds which you have seen now. Green bonds is the government of India, for example, and other municipal corporations as well, raising money for the market, especially for the environmental related projects. Ghaziabad Municipal Corporation recently raised 150 crore rupees from the market in the form of green bonds, again to give environmental projects a much bigger push. So the government of India also has been taking such initiatives in order to give a push towards ESG. The next article that we have is from the front page of the Hindu newspaper. That is the central government's affidavit on same-sex marriage. Now this is not a new issue. This issue has been going on for some months now. Basically a few months back, there were certain same-sex couples that filed a PIL in the Supreme Court. The same-sex couples, the PIL that they filed, they said that we should be allowed to get married under the Special Marriage Act of 1954. So in India, we have a law called Special Marriage Act of 1954. Same-sex couples said that we should be allowed to get married under this act. Usually what happens whenever you go to the Supreme Court against a government law, the first reaction that the Supreme Court will usually give is, Supreme Court will ask the government to respond. Supreme Court will ask the government to file an affidavit about what do they think. Same happened here. Supreme Court asked the government, what do you think? Should same-sex couples be allowed to get married? Should their marriage be legally recognized in India or not? As expected, the central government has filed the affidavit opposing the idea of same-sex marriage. The central government said that marriage is a sanctity attached to it, and in major parts of the country it is regarded as sacrament. It is a holy union, and we do not support same-sex marriage. This is the central government's idea, that we do not support it. Now, this issue of same-sex marriage goes back to 2018. In 2018, the Supreme Court in Navtej Singh Johar case decriminalized homosexuality. Now please understand something here. Government of India said that in 2018 Supreme Court gave a judgment that homosexuality is not a crime. Government said, okay, we are fine with this. A man along with a man can live together, we don't have any issue. A woman along with a woman can live together, we don't have any issue. But the government said we cannot support same-sex couples to get officially married. The government said that yes, you have decriminalized it, no issues with that. But we do not think that they should be allowed to legally start a family. There are differences between these two things. Decriminalizing homosexuality is fine, but we do not support same-sex marriage. The Special Marriage Act of 1954, as you know, it has been used in a lot. This is a law under which two people can get married if they are not covered under any of the personal laws. So every religion has different personal laws. The Hindu religion has different personal laws. Then there would be separate personal laws for Islam. There would be separate personal law for Sikh, Christianity, etc. Since these personal laws talk about marriage within their religion, usually when people from two different religions marry, that is considered as a marriage under the Special Marriage Act of 1954. Under this, people can get married even if they are not covered under certain personal laws. The petitioner said that under this Special Marriage Act, we also should be allowed to get married. But as you can see, Government of India has opposed this. Now, this is not the end of the story. Please remember, this is just an affidavit that the Supreme Court had asked from the Government of India. Supreme Court just asked the Government of India about their view, what do they think on this issue. Government said we don't support this. The Supreme Court will take the final call. So please don't think this is the end of the issue. It is the Supreme Court which finally decide whether we would allow same-sex marriage or not. But at least for now, the government does not seem to be in favor of this. The Special Marriage Act is not still now being used for same-sex marriage. It is mainly used for couples which belong to different religions. Now, same-sex marriage is again something which is gradually being accepted as an idea in many countries around the world. As you can see from the list as well, most of the countries that have accepted this idea, European countries, are developed nations that are much more liberal as compared to some other countries. Switzerland, for example, recognized same-sex marriage in 2022. There are other countries, most European countries, Denmark, France, there is Scotland, Finland, Ireland, even US. All these have accepted the idea, legalized same-sex marriage. But in India, it has not been done so far. Also remember, you do not have to have a specific point of view about whether same-sex marriage should be allowed or should not be allowed. So UPSC, for example, will not ask you a question that do you support same-sex marriage or do you not support same-sex marriage. So you should have your point of view about both the sides. Why it should be allowed, for ensuring that there is equality, for ensuring that everyone has the right to choice so they can choose their partner, and the other side of the story as well. Talk about Indian culture, our society not being open to this idea so far. So rather than thinking, yes, I support this or I do not support this, try and have points on both sides of the argument so that you can actually explain your story. These were the main specific topic that needed much more analysis. Now we'll move on to the prelims part of it. Now it is time to discuss some of those topics from where it is more relevant or it is more pertinent that you might get questions asked in the prelims point of view. Let me quickly take up a couple of questions. Aditya saying, wouldn't the allowance of same-sex marriage strictly fall under special majority of the parliament, since it is not a fundamental right and no provision for it in the basic structure doctrine? No, Aditya. So basically there is an article in the constitution, article 142. Article 142 in simple terms gives unlimited power to the Supreme Court. Article 142 says Supreme Court can give any directive or any judgment that will establish complete justice in the society. So in the name of complete justice, Supreme Court can now give almost any judgment, whatever they want. Then Sharab is saying, need your opinion. For the government saying same-sex marriage is morally wrong, but court has to go with ethics. I don't think court has to go with ethics. Court has to just go with the interpretation of the law. If court do not give legitimate status to same-sex marriage, will it be a violation of fundamental rights? No. If the court says same-sex marriage are not allowed, it is not a violation of fundamental right, because if it is a violation of fundamental right, then how would the court not allow it? Basically, whatever the court says becomes the end verdict. As simple as that. One last question from Shankar. Are MSMEs under CSR? So there is no distinguishing between MSMEs or big companies. There is just the criteria that we saw. There are three eligibility criteria of the profit, net worth, and turnover. If your company is under any one of that, you will have to be paying CSR or you'll have to be spending in CSR. Doesn't matter whatever the companies are. Perfect. Let's move on then. The next article from the Hindu newspaper, which is more relevant from the prelims point of view, is about the Swachh Bharat. Swachh Bharat mission, as you would know, under this the government of India had claimed that we have achieved 100% ODF status. ODF is open defecation free. So government of India had claimed that under the Swachh Bharat mission, we have achieved 100% open defecation free status, meaning that now everyone uses household toilets, no one goes out in the open. That was a government's claim. However, as per this report in the Hindu newspaper, this is not true. If you look at this graph, you will still see there are a lot of households, especially in the rural areas, that still don't have their personal toilet. Since they don't have their personal toilet, people are still going out in the open. So the idea that the entire country is 100% defecation free is still not true. So the government's claim that we have achieved this has not been fulfilled so far. Now, when you say open defecation free, that means an area where people do not go out in the open. Open defecation free usually is of three different stages. Please remember that. there is ODF, then there is ODF plus status, and then there is ODF double plus status. ODF status is given to an area if at any point of day not even a single person is found defecating in the open. Simple. So if there is a village where not even a single person is found defecating in the open, that village will be called ODF. ODF plus, when any point of day not a single person is found defecating or urinating and all community and public toilets are functional and well maintained. That is when you get ODF plus status. And the third, ODF double plus is given when apart from ODF plus, the septage sewage are safely managed and well treated. There is no discharge or dumping of untreated facial sludge, and water bodies and drains etc. are not utilized to dispose of human waste. When this becomes true, then you become ODF double plus. ODF plus, ODF double plus, and ODF are three different categories. Please remember this for prelims point of view. Important for prelims. These kind of definitions can very easily be asked. The difference between ODF, ODF plus, and ODF double plus. The Swachh Bharat mission that has been asked or that has been mentioned in this article, as you know, it was launched in 2014 by the Jal Shakti Ministry to achieve universal sanitation and to mainly ensure that the entire country, especially rural areas, we become open defecation free. There have been two phases of the Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin. The first phase was from 2014 till 2019, where Government of India in the mission mode gave a lot of toilets, built a lot of personal toilets. More than 10 crore individual toilets were constructed in this phase. Then we came to phase 2, where the government also focused on reducing plastic waste, giving adequate facilities to ensure that we become open defecation free. But as the name suggests, or as the report in the Hindu newspaper suggests, we are still not open defecation free. This map that I showed you, when you download the PPT, you can see this map in a lot of details, so don't worry here. There it is written what the map tells you. First map tells you percentage of rural households in which majority of people had access to some kind of latrine. So these are different maps with definitions. Please feel free to go through them once you download the PPT. Next article from the prelims point of view is a news from Rajasthan. Rajasthan government has decided they will introduce or they will pass a bill called the Right to Health Bill. Remember, this has not been passed so far. They are trying to pass it because the state legislatures, as you know, you are controlled by the lower house only. Rajasthan anyways does not have an upper house. So if the government decides to pass it, it will very easily be passed. What exactly is this? The Right to Health Bill in simple terms is a bill of Rajasthan government. As the name suggests, it will give free medical facilities in both private and government hospitals. Whatever medical services that you require in hospitals, clinic, labs, you will be given free of cost healthcare service. As simple as that. The bill also says that if you have a medical emergency, no hospital, private or government, should say no to you, whatever be the expense. Just because of expense, you should not be denied admission into any hospital. That is what the bill is. Bill says patients have the right to get treated for whatever illness that they have. It also says that the state resident, so people living in Rajasthan, will have the right to be informed about the consent. They will have the right to be informed about their disease, their treatment, etc. without any discrimination. It has been made the responsibility of the government to finance whatever treatment is required. Now, as expected, the private sector does not like this bill. Why? See, the problem with these kind of bills is simple. When the government says to private hospitals that don't worry, if anyone comes to you, you give them treatment, we will give you money. It is very easy to say this, but the problem is on ground, the most difficult thing ever is for anyone to actually take out money from the government. If the government tells you that we will give you 100 rupees, trust me, you have to ask 100 times to actually get that 100 rupees out of the government. So from the government, when the government promises we'll give you this much money, we'll give you that much money, you know that this is not going to be easy. So hospitals don't like it. Private hospitals say that we just don't want to deal with the government. For example, if any one of you has ever applied for any government scholarship, you would know government scholarships you can get, but getting the money in the government scholarship is very, very, very difficult. Because it takes such a long time, there will be so many paperwork involved, so many things that will come in between, step-by-step process. It becomes very, very, very difficult. So private sector obviously does not want it. They say that no, government will not give us the money on time, so we can't do this. Now, does the constitution in India talk about right to health? Not really. Specifically in the constitution, there is no mention of right to health. But experts say right to health is a part of right to life only under Article 21. Because you will enjoy your right to life only when you have right to health. Supreme Court also in 1996 said it is the government's responsibility to provide medical aid in the interest of strengthening public health. We do have certain government schemes. We have the Ayushman Bharat Yojana, for example. But again, there are a lot of limitations on Ayushman Bharat Yojana. Where will it apply? Where will it not apply? There's a cap also. In the Rajasthan government bill, they are including all the private hospitals, all the government hospitals, and they are not putting any condition as such. Many people would call it revadi, many people would call it a freebie, many other would call it something that is the government's responsibility, because taking care of public health is one of the primary responsibilities of any government. Only a healthy population would be able to ensure that they contribute to economy, would be able to ensure that they contribute to the country's GDP. So this is a step that many countries take in worldwide as well. Many developed nations do provide free of cost healthcare. It is not the first time that is happening in Rajasthan, but many experts would say this is just a freebie, the government should not do this. The bill has not been passed so far. Once the bill passes, that is when we'll have to see what will be the original shape or the final shape of the bill. The next article that we have is a new kind of microscope being developed by certain scientists called the glowscope. So there is a new kind of microscope being developed by scientists called the glowscope. This glowscope, as the name suggests, will help you identify microorganisms by glowing in different types of light. So you can see certain cells, you can see certain viruses, they will be in different colors when you see through it, because they will be glowing in different colors depending upon what color of light, depending upon how much light do they reflect, and that is how it will give you a better view and allow you to analyze all those microorganisms. This is the idea of glowscope. In 2014, there was a very interesting discovery that was made by Stanford University scientists, where they discovered or they made something called the fold scope. Fold scope was a microscope made out of paper. I don't know how many of you have seen this. There are a lot of YouTube videos available. Just go on Google and search fold scope. Fold scope is a microscope just made of paper and nothing else. That was developed by Stanford University scientists. It is so special that it can capture images of cell also. But the problem is the fold scope is extremely expensive. It is not that easy. Glowscope, on the other hand, which has been developed now, is considered as a device that will make it much easier to own it. It will be much more affordable. It uses a technology called fluorescence microscopy. Fluorescence microscopy, as the name suggests, it studies the objects by seeing what kind of light do they absorb, what kind of light do they reflect, what kind of light is scattered. Depending on that, there are different colors of object that you will see, there are different colors of cells that you will see. The object is illuminated with different lights of different wavelengths, giving them different colors, allowing us to analyze them whenever and in whatever way we want. Also, it becomes very easy to distinguish between different objects even when you're looking through this microscope. Scientists have also developed something called different fluorophores. The problem, however, with this kind of a glowscope that they have developed is, it is not that easy to use. The fold scope that was developed in 2014, it is just made of paper, so you can assemble it very quickly. With the glowscope, the problem is, although it is cheaper, although the rates will be close to 4,000 rupees only, but the problem is, to use this glowscope, you would require many other things as well. Special type of lighting instruments, you would require many other types of supporting equipments as well. So on one hand, yes, this is something which is a very, very good beginning. This is something that is a kind of breakthrough in science, but on the other hand, it's not as affordable as it seems. There will be a lot more money that will have to be spent on other equipments as well. As I told you, the cost may be about 25,000 to 4,000, but the problem is, it requires a lot of other supporting equipments as well, including fluorophores, biological samples, knowing how to actually assemble that, having LED light, the proper LED lights, and that is why it is not as easy to use as the fold scope. The fold scope of 2014, made up of paper, much easier to use but much more expensive. The glowscope, much lesser expensive but difficult to use because you require many other equipments also along with that. Next news from Maharashtra. Maharashtra government has decided to relaunch their scheme called the Jalyukt Shivar. Jalyukt Shivar is an old scheme that was introduced by ex-Chief Minister Devendra Fadnavis. Under this scheme, the government of Maharashtra mainly focuses on those areas which lack water, they are facing drought, etc. Now, the government is planning to reintroduce this scheme. Why is that so? See, Maharashtra is a place in which there are a lot of cities and villages which are very prone to drought. You have seen farmers in large numbers in Maharashtra, in fact, committing suicide because their agriculture is going bad, they just don't have enough water. To solve that problem, this scheme was introduced by the government. About 82% area of Maharashtra falls under rain-fed sector, while 52% area is prone to drought. Means over half of area in Maharashtra would go through long dry spells, they would not have enough water. To ensure that that does not really hinder the agricultural output of Maharashtra, the government of Maharashtra started this scheme. Under this scheme, what will they do? They will build much better dams, ponds in these areas to store water. They will also maintain existing resources such as canal, etc. Their repairment will be taken up. They will undertake activities of desilting of water conservation as well. Desilting means when you have a water body, on the bed of the water body on the surface, because of sand, because of the rocks breaking away, there is a lot of sand that gets accumulated at the bottom. That is called silting. You have to remove all of that for the water to flow properly. For example, if this is the water bed, this is the river, a lot of times sand gets accumulated here. That stops the flow of water. To remove that, the process is called desilting. Desilting is an exercise that is conducted very, very regularly in most of the canals. Whatever canal is being built at the national or at the state level, the governments usually undertake the desilting exercise to make sure that this sand is removed and the flow of water becomes better. So this scheme of the Maharashtra government, the Jalyukt Shivar, will plan to undertake these projects as well. In the prelims, you can very well be asked, where they will just tell you the name of the scheme, Jalyukt Shivar. They might ask you which government is implementing it. They might also ask you the objective of this. So do remember that. The next news that we have is that the government of India is planning to bring a new law under which any new building that is being built will compulsorily be a net zero waste building. Meaning that if you're living in a society, whatever waste is being generated, food waste or dry waste, that has to be treated within the society only. Whatever wastewater is being generated, that has to be treated within the society only. That is a new law the government is now planning to introduce. Why? Because now thousands and thousands of kgs of waste is given out of the society. The same waste goes into the land, it goes into landfills. You see in Delhi there are mountains of waste that have now come up. They look like the Aravalli Hills, but if you actually look at them closely, they're not Aravalli Hills, they're actually just the waste mountains. That is because of so much waste being generated. So Government of India thinks that the best way to solve that problem will be to ensure that the societies or any new building does not produce any waste. Even their liquid also is treated within the society, so that the work of manual scavenging automatically dies down. Manual scavenging means that even today people by hand have to ensure that the waste is separated. Even today people by hand have to take care of the waste that you just deposit, just throw in the dustbin. All that is actually a form of manual scavenging. That has to be reduced, although it has already been banned by the government, but that practice still continues. It can only be taken out completely if at the source itself the waste is not generated. This is the government's idea. Government has now asked the states also to put penalties on those buildings that do not abide by this. We have a sustainable development goal number 6 that says the governments must aim to halve the proportion of untreated wastewater and increase recycling and safe reuse globally. All these things are government's initiative to ensure that number 1, manual scavenging goes away. Number 2, the waste disposal, the waste handling becomes much easier, and we don't have all those mountains of waste that we have developed in the national capital. In this year's budget speech also, the finance minister said that we will switch to 100% mechanized sewer cleaning. We will end manual scavenging. Although the law still prohibits it, but it is still practiced across the entire country, unfortunately. This finally brings us to the end of today's Hindu Newspaper Analysis. Very quickly, a reminder, tomorrow also we are meeting at 5 p.m. only, just like today. Please make sure you join in live at 5 p.m. Day after tomorrow, we will switch back to the 10 a.m. routine that we had. But tomorrow again, it is 5 a.m. that will be the class timing. So please do join me for that as well. There are a couple of practice questions. Please try and write answer to these questions as well. As always, you can download the PDF that we are using here from the description of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Do go over to Telegram channel to attend the quiz as well. I will see you tomorrow, 5 p.m. once again. Do remember, live here. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye. Jai Hind.